Hello, and welcome to Resource Family Pre-Certification Training for San Luis Obispo County. I'm Julie DeFranco, and I'm a program manager with the department. We would typically provide this training in person. We especially like to provide in-person training so we can develop connection and relationship and be most responsive to resource and relative parents going through our pre-certification program. However, due to COVID-19, and in order to ensure the safety and well-being of all, we're providing this training available online. The benefit of that also is that you can watch it at a frequency and at a time that works best for you and your family. This is session 1 of 2 sessions that are required for pre-certification training. Your RFA social worker will speak with you of other requirements prior to pre-certification. However, this segment is the Resource Family Training session 1 and session 2. Session 1, I'll be sharing with you information about our department, our overview and goals of pre-certification training. I'll share with you some of our values and core components for family reunification. I'll also discuss tools and philosophies of engagement that are going to be really important as partners in this work together, serving children and families. And session 1 will end with sharing some information with you about the Quality Parenting Initiative and our foster support program, both of which are very valuable resources for you and your family. So pre-certification training. The intention of this training is not to be a one-stop shop, nor do we expect that you'll leave this training having a full understanding of our entire system and not have any questions. In fact, this is intended as an introduction and a beginning conversation about our journey together in supporting children and families. At the end of the presentation, I'll share information with you on how to contact me directly or our department to answer any questions that you might have. Again, I'll also refer you to your Resource Family Approval social worker who can also support you. One of the things that's most important to us is that we work together as a team to support the children that are coming in your home. And the way that we do that is through a professional relationship built on transparency and ongoing communication. Pre-certification training is one training component of requirements for resource families. You'll learn more about those as I move forward. And then the goal of training is not just to check it off as getting it done, but it really is intended to be responsive to you, your unique needs as a parent or a caregiver, and the unique needs of the child or children in your care. So I wanted to share a little bit with you about our department's leadership and the structure of our organization. And one of the most important components I want to share with you is our philosophy that our leadership, including our director, our deputies in management, as well as our supervisors, our role is to support our social workers in serving you and children and families in the community. As outlined on the screen, Devin Drake is our Director for all of Social Services, Linda Belch is our Deputy Director for Children and Adult Services, and we have a variety of division managers who oversee programs supporting our work. I'll share with you in our Life of a Case more information about which programs those are. Program managers such as myself support program development and legislation implementation. I shared previously one of the programs that I support is Resource Family Training, so I'm very happy to be with you today. This is a visual of our department breakdown. I'm not going to read it to you, but I thought it might be a helpful visual reference to kind of organize understanding of how we are structured. You'll see at the top is the Department of Social Services, and then on the second line, you'll see CWS, that stands for Child Welfare Services. And then that flows down to each of our programs, of which I'll speak on further. One of the most important components of our work are our core values and our ethics in the work that we do. The National Association of Social Workers defines these areas as core social work values, and they are definitely reflected and embraced in the work that we do. Service, social justice, dignity and worth of every person, the importance of human relationships, integrity, competence, and not doing any harm. The concept of not doing any harm, I'll just share briefly. The idea behind that is that our interventions and supports should not bring any additional harm to families, that we should be walking in integrity in practice, so that we are very, very trauma informed and mindful of our interactions. The Child Welfare Services core values as I mentioned, very closely mirror those of the National Association of Social Workers. Safety, permanence, and well-being are our core values that we report to our department, to our state, and to our nation on. They are quite lengthy, and I don't know that there would be great value in doing deep dives into them, but this slide shows you the most important components of each of these. So children are protected from abuse and neglect. Children are maintained in their homes whenever possible. With regard to permanency, that continuity of family connections and relationships are preserved. Well-being of children is very important in that we strive to ensure that families can provide for their children's needs and that children's educational, physical, and mental health care needs are met. Some additional priorities that I wanted to share with you. As I would in a live training, I'm not going to read every line on this slide. However, because we don't have the opportunity to have conversation as we would, I've included some more detail on the slides for your future reference. But I would like to point out that we are committed to ensuring that children remain with their family of origin if they can possibly do so safely. We believe that children deserve to remain in communities that they're supported by, that they're included in placement with their siblings, and that we are supporting children transitioning to adulthood. One of the most important ways that we attend to each of these is by working on child and family teams, which I'll share more information about. The next segment is on the tools and philosophies of engagement. So guiding principles. We believe the entire community is responsible for children, youth, and family. To be effective, we must embrace the entire continuum of prevention, intervention, and services. And engagement with consumers and communities is vital to promoting safety, permanence, and well-being. And so what that means in practice is that we are committed to engaging effectively with children, families, communities, and partners to wrap around a family and provide the best synchronized services and supports possible. We believe in the importance of relationship and attachment. When I talk about the life of a case and timelines for reunification, I'll talk about timelines that are legislated in the law and how those are grounded in recognition of the importance of relationship and attachment. I'm also going to talk to you about placement stability and how placement instability can be very harmful to children and families in broken relationships and attachments. The core practice model is I'm going to share a little bit of information with you, but there are three components that I'd like to talk about. One is safety organized practice, the second is child and family teaming, and the third is trauma-informed care. So what is the integrated core practice model? In essence, it defines expectations for social workers, juvenile probation officers, county mental health staff, and other partners who are serving children and families. It's an agreed upon outline of shared values and principles, core components, standards of practice, and staff and leadership behaviors that support best practice. This is a visual that gives you just a sense of how all of those things work together, where we're placing child safety and strength-based practice at the center of our work. Safety organized practice promotes good working relationships through the utilization of solution-focused interviewing and specific strategies for working with children in interviews to fully engage them in the process and having voice in the matters that are affecting them and their family. Safety organized practice promotes critical thinking and mapping and the use of structured decision making, which is an empirical tool that essentially helps us support equity in assessments across anyone that we're serving. So for example, if a call comes into our hotline and one social worker answers the call and receives the information, and they're utilizing structured decision-making assessment tools. Likewise, if the same call came into the hotline and I answered it and I'm utilizing the structured decision-making assessment tools, we should both reasonably come to the same conclusion, such that there's a minimization of bias and promotion of equity in our supports and assessments. Safety organized practice enhances safety. We develop harm and danger statements. We developed well-formed goals, behaviorally specific plans. We work to develop networks of support, and we work towards collaborative planning and solution-focused social work. A really important component of safety organized practice is the definition of safety, and it's defined as actions of protection by the caregiver that mitigate the danger and are demonstrated over time. That's a lot of words, but essentially what that means is we're not looking for a checkbox of services. So for example, if we have a parent who is brought to our attention because they have driven under the influence of a substance with their child in the car, which placed that child at risk of immediate harm, simply participating in a substance abuse treatment program and providing a card or a certificate does not necessarily provide us with information that that parent or individual has integrated and developed awareness and understanding of their behavior and their actions or inactions and the impact on the child. We'll talk more about case plans at another point. So what are child and family team meetings? In essence, they're state mandated practice for building an integrated process for developing child and family team planning. They're child and family focused, and they're driven by the voice of the family. They're individuals and supports that are identified by the family or individuals as important to them and who can come to the table and provide additional information, knowledge, or support to help us move forward in the case. Child and family team meetings are one component of child and family team meetings. This next segment is on trauma-informed care. And throughout the life of your placement or future placements, you are likely going to hear quite a bit about trauma and its impact on children and families' lives. And hopefully this information will help support you in preparing or parenting the children or child in your care. So one definition of trauma is defined as witnessing or experiencing an event that poses a real or a perceived threat to the life or well-being of a child or someone close to the child. It's a situation that overwhelms the child's ability to cope with feelings of fear, helplessness, or horror, and may be expressed by disorganized or agitated behavior. There's a concept of complex and complicated trauma as well, which we'll touch on. Exposure to chronic trauma can often caused by adults entrusted with the child's care. So there's trauma, there's a type of trauma that perhaps witnessing an accident or being in an automobile accident. However, it is a more complex trauma when the individual imposing the neglect or abuse on the child is someone that the child cares for and trusts. Nadine Burke-Harris is our Surgeon General for the state of California, and she did some groundbreaking work on a study called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, which later in this segment you'll get to see a short clip on. But one of the things that she shared that she discovered in her clinic work with children, she was seeing child after child with the same set of symptomology. And this is a quote from her. She said, if 100 children are drinking out of a well and 98 of them get diarrhea, we can give them dose after dose after dose of antibiotics. Or alternatively, we can figure out what's going on in the well. And that really is an underlying premise of trauma. We can look at the behavior or the manifestation, or we can try and look beyond the surface to what is going on or what has gone on beneath, to really attend to those items to provide the best resolution. Oprah Winfrey provided a segment on 60 Minutes where she talked about trauma that I think is very telling, and I'm going to share with you. Unfortunately, we won't have the opportunity to have discussion and dialogue, but I do encourage you to consider how this information could potentially impact you as a relative or a resource parent.
The trauma. And there's a lot of new science here about trauma-informed care. For anyone who's dealing with a traumatized child, what can they learn from your story?
Well, I think that the story is it is my hope that our story on trauma-informed care will not just be impactful, but will also be revolutionary. It certainly has caused a revolution in my own life. And I was struck by the story because it reminded me of my own childhood growing up in Milwaukee. It's not lost on me, the irony of being back in the same city, Milwaukee, where I grew up on welfare, poor, a lot of negative experiences, sexual abuse and all of that. What's the difference between a really bad childhood and being able to overcome that, and a traumatic childhood and someone not being able to overcome that?
Really, it boils down to something pretty simple.
And the answer that Dr. Bruce Perry gives you is relationships.
If you also have opportunities to be connected to people in positive ways, that can buffer some of those effects. And as you get older,
I'd like to know more about that.
What he really means is love. He's a scientist. He's not going to use the word love, but it really is about how you are responded to, valued, trusted, and loved by those around you. So I didn't get it from the people who I felt I should have gotten it from. It can be anybody who cares enough about you to ask the question, what happened to you?
Could you trace back in your mind it was that person?
I know exactly who did it. I know exactly the moment I started to feel valued, and for me, it was school. I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher because of Mrs. Duncan. And I haven't seen Mrs. Duncan since then, and Mrs. Duncan is here today. The moment I felt the most value was in my fourth grade class when Mrs. Duncan said to me, I was the one who was chosen to lead the class and whatever it was. So what was I like? I don't really remember it. I do remember you.
I remember you such a fluent reader. Well, if I had a class full of students like Oprah, I would have been floating on air.
So Mrs. Duncan instilled in me this sense of believing that I mattered. And that is what every human being is looking for. When you first heard that I had done something in life, did you know that it was me?
Yes, I kept up with you without your being aware of it.
And it was Mrs. Duncan who helped heal you?
For me, yes. It was Mrs. Duncan, and then it was my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Ram. It was school that made me feel a sense of value and connection.
You learned a lot on this story.
Oh, I learned a lot on the story. The story was life-changing for me.
Life-changing, really.
Life-changing. And people use that word rhetorically. Life-changing. It's changed the way I operate in my business, with my people, with my school. 1, 2, 3. You say that the most important question to ask of people who have gone through trauma is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. Yeah. So when you see, a church being shot up, or you see, all of the headline-making stories of people seemingly gone mad, your first thought is, what happened to that person? Right. What has been life-changing for me is the question, what happened to you? Not what is wrong with you, but what happened to you? Which is an important question, not just for people who have been so-called traumatized, but it's the most important question you can ask of anyone. I can say that of all the stories I've ever done in my life and all of the experiences I've ever had and people I've interviewed, this story has had more impact on me than practically anything I've ever done.
It's changed the way you see everyone?
It's changed the way I see everyone. So when I have an employee who is acting out of line or who is just being a jerk, I don't think, what's wrong with that guy? What's wrong with that girl? What's wrong with that girl? I think, I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened that caused them to behave that way. That's what this story did for me.
So, although we're not able to have open group discussion about this video, I encourage each of you to consider your thoughts and reflections and any takeaways as it relates to your care and provision of children in our system. One thing that I really want to point out is this concept of looking beyond what is wrong with you with regard to behaviors and really looking to a place of what happened or where is this coming from. And while that sounds really straightforward in theory, in the moment when any child is acting out, it can be hard to not feel frustrated by the behavior. But one of the things that many of our resource and relative parents share is the idea of pausing and being intentional and creating a pause in response rather than reactivity to some potentially difficult behaviors. And that's true in any parental relationship. So now we're going to hear from Dot, one of our relative and resource parent trainers. She's an amazing woman who has contributed so much to our community, and she took the time to put together some messages for each of you. So we'll go ahead and play those now.
Hi, this is Dot Lynch, and I'm introducing myself. I work full-time in the mental health field, but I was also a foster resource parent for about 5 years from 2004 to 2008. So I wanted to share some of the experiences that I usually share while I'm teaching the RFT class. Thanks.
So now she's going to share a little bit on trauma.
Hi again. The next part that I'd like to share is talking about the definition of trauma. I'm going to read a little bit to you and then talk about my own experience with it. It says, trauma is an emotional response to an intense event that threatens or causes harm. The harm can be physical or emotional, real or perceived, and it can threaten the child or someone close to him or to her. Trauma can be the result of a single event, or it can result from exposure to multiple events over time. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this definition is because it reminds me of our first foster son that we got, 11-year-old boy with an extensive trauma history. And in the definition that I just read, it talks about perceived injustice. And I wanted to share that when I was working with him, that anytime that he was told no, it would be a trigger for him, and he was perceiving that he was being treated unfairly again, even when it was in reality something that needed to happen, such as setting limits like you have to do for any 11-year-old boy. So just to be aware that normal things can be trauma triggers that we have to help our kiddos work through at times. Thanks.
Next, Dot is going to share some reflections on grief and loss.
Hi, this is Dot, and we're talking about grief right now, and something that a lot of new resource parents don't understand that we talk about it is that why don't kids look sad or depressed when they're struggling with grief, and why don't they just tell me that they're sad and thinking about their loss and their biological parents or their biological family and that they're missing them. And why do I have to find out about it because, you know, they acted up at school or they, you know, got into an argument with a sibling in the home or some other sort of behavioral, bizarre acting out thing. How come they have to express it that way? And so when we talk about the stages of grief in class, and I ask everyone who has experienced grief in their lives, invariably everyone raises their hand. So it's something that we've all dealt with, but as adults, we've had a lot more chance to process that and be able to figure it out than our kids have been able to. They're new at this. They're little. This is almost undoubtedly the most traumatic thing that they've gone through so far. And so part of our role as resource parents is to be able to figure out and put words to what they're experiencing. And they call this developing an emotional vocabulary. And it's something that kids work on in therapy, and your resource child may or may not have a therapist working with them, but either way, we need to be there to continue the process, either to help as the therapist guides them or to be the therapist for kiddos who don't have one separately. And I'm not saying that you need to, you know, get a license and go out and practice therapy, but it's hard for human beings in general to express their emotions because feelings are really hard to put labels on, and it's something that takes a lot of practice. And even as adults, a lot of the time we're not good at it. I think on a basic level, humans know that either we feel good or we feel bad, and that's pretty much all that the brain recognizes when it's under a state of stress. And so that's what's coming out in these kids who don't have the practice of using their words to describe their emotions, and it's a long, drawn-out process. And so one of our roles is to be able to go through and, you know, sometimes we can guess, and I find it really helpful to phrase things as a question, like, hey, I noticed that you're slamming things around in the kitchen. Are you frustrated? And, you know, give them prompts that they can answer without having to use so many words, and help themselves figure out words in the process, and just say, you know, hey, can we take a break and look at this a little bit more logically? And I found that helps.
So much of what Dot shares, I think, is just really valuable. Having that lived experience as opposed to just hearing a lecture or presentation, I think adds such value. One of the things that I was really impressed with on this clip was her awareness of the development of an emotional vocabulary and this discrepancy between the age and cognitive development of our children and the magnitude of the trauma that they potentially experienced, and how you reconcile those. And so her suggestion of creating space and trying to name emotions, and I think she even talks about, you know, saying pause, I think is very, very valuable. Otherwise, things can, you have a greater opportunity to connect with the child on that relational level and help them emotionally regulate and start to understand and name some of the big feelings they're experiencing. This is a great clip. I mentioned Nadine Burke-Harris, who is our Surgeon General for the state of California, who did the groundbreaking work on the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And so we're going to go ahead and watch that now.
A child's experiences early in life are important building blocks for the developing brain. Genes, nature, are like the blueprint. They provide the basic framework for brain development. However, genes do not design the brain completely. Environmental influences, nurture, fine-tune how the brain works by shaping which brain connections get used. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent, whereas ones that do not get much use fade away. Together, genes and the environment build the foundation for all future development. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships early in life lead to healthy development. But children's brains capture other experiences as well. Stressful events. However, not all stress is bad. Positive stress involves normal childhood experiences, like starting daycare or meeting a new person for the first time. This stress is essential for healthy development because it helps children develop coping skills and confidence. But when stress is frequent, chronic, and uncontrolled, it is toxic to children, especially when they do not have a caregiver to provide support or buffer the stress. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, exposure to intimate partner violence, parental depression or addiction, and poverty, are toxic stressors which could lead to lifelong changes in learning and behavior. ACEs early in development can impact social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, increased risk-taking behaviors such as drinking and substance use, and increased risk of disease, disability, and social problems later in life. The question is, how do adverse childhood experiences impact a lifelong development? One of the most important systems in our body is our stress system. It's activated when we experience stress. We become alert, our heart rate increases, and so do our stress hormone levels, cortisol and adrenaline. Our body is ready to react, what is known as fight or flight. A short period of time after the stress is over, or if a child receives support from a caregiver, the stress response turns off and the body returns to a normal state. Adverse childhood experiences create stress responses that stay active, and without the support of a caregiver, the system has difficulty shutting off completely. This constant and prolonged activation can affect immune system functioning and increase the chances of sickness, infection, and disease. Prolonged activation of stress hormones is also toxic to the brain. Certain areas of the brain are more vulnerable to toxic stress, including the executive center, or the brain's control center, an area important for solving complex problems, attention, reasoning, impulsivity, inhibition, and learning. A second area is the emotional center, the brain's alarm system, which is involved in processing and interpreting emotions and the ability to control impulses. The third area is the memory and learning center, the brain's filing cabinet, which plays a major role in learning and the formation and retrieval of memories. Science shows that adverse childhood experiences impact all of these brain centers. Behaviorally, what we begin to see is emotional distress, poor emotion regulation, greater impulsivity, learning difficulties, and physical and mental health problems. More recently, science has begun to look at how ACEs cause changes in gene expression through a process called epigenetics, which helps us understand how nature and nurture interact. Epigenetics causes changes in the way genes work without changing the DNA code itself. This occurs through chemical changes influencing how the code is used. In other words, genes are like the hardware in a computer. They determine the boundaries of what is possible. However, we need an operating system to tell the hardware what to do. Epigenetics is like the operating system directing the function of a gene's DNA hardware. The genes we are born with are the genes that we have for life, but experiences like nutrition, exercise, smoking, stressors, and relationships all affect our biology. Adverse childhood experiences are associated with epigenetic changes related to stress, brain development, cognition, and systems associated with mental and physical health. Changes that happen early in brain development are more likely to be enduring and are possibly passed on to future generations as well. The good news is that positive, supportive relationships at any stage in life can make a difference. However, supporting families and children early on will help prevent many of these negative outcomes. One of the key ingredients for healthy development is having warm, loving, and actively engaged caregivers. This involves promoting serve and return interactions, where caregivers actively and warmly engage with the child, making eye contact, responding to sounds, words, gestures, emotional needs, and sharing experiences like reading and play. Providing programs that support caregivers to strengthen these abilities are the blocks that build healthy foundations for life.
So I really appreciated how this video took a really big conversation and kind of complex concepts and broke it down into manageable pieces. And again, I'll encourage each of you to reflect on what your takeaway is and what you can use to support yourself in parenting and working with children in your care. I would like to say that every child is different, and every child has a different degree of resiliency. So by no means are we suggesting that every child or the child in your care is going to manifest very difficult behaviors or extreme dysregulation. We just want you to know and understand from a fundamental level the biomechanics of the brain and the body and how emotions are tied to the central nervous system. One of the things that we talk about in an in-person training that I want to bring forward is the knowledge that when children become dysregulated, that fight or flight that they talked about in this video, that it is very difficult for them to receive and process information. So for children who are not dealing with a trauma history, cognitive behavioral parenting works. So for example, if you keep slamming the door, you won't have ice cream for dinner. While that seems like a straightforward concept, often what we suggest families do is that they work to connect with the individual child through relationship. Some of this naming those big emotions, taking a pause, and helping a child get back on track with their central nervous system before moving into discipline. So more to come on that, and certainly if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact myself or your RFA social worker. So we've talked a fair amount about trauma, and so I don't want to be redundant, but I will say that engagement and connection is really the foundation. And again, that's one of our core values, and it is one of the mitigating factors in dealing with and actually healing from trauma. In the ACEs video, they talked about epigenetics, and I'm no expert by any means, but at kind of a basic level, what that means is that the brain neurobiology is impacted by trauma. However, restorative relationships can actually heal those and reset those. And so each of you are in a very unique and wonderful position through relationship with children to help them actually heal their neurobiology and move through trauma. And that is pretty amazing, pretty exciting, the power of human relationships and of love, really. So a lot of what we do in our work with child and family teams, which includes each of you, is that we want to just have this awareness that if families and children are coming from traumatic backgrounds, they might display difficult or challenging behaviors. Not to say that they all will, but it's possible. When we start responding to these things as good or bad and labeling, we can get caught up in kind of personalizing the behavior in moving away from that trauma lens. So we encourage families to understand that most of the challenging behaviors that children develop have worked for them in the past in moving through and surviving the trauma or neglect that they've experienced. And so it's our opportunity to help them kind of steer back on a different path and develop different strategies and tools to take care of themselves. Dot's going to talk a little bit about trauma triggers.
Hi, this is Dot again, and I wanted to talk more on the subject of trauma triggers. One class or a story that I usually tell classes is that we have to be aware and on the lookout for things that we might consider to be happy events that could also be trauma triggers for our kiddos. One story is that there was a Christmas that we had as a family that was a really great and wonderful almost perfect day. We had taken our kids up to see some friends, and they had a long day of playing and opening presents and celebrating and eating, and it was a really great day. But then we drove home, and our 11-year-old son was getting more and more defiant, I guess, in the car. And then by the time we got home, he was downright upset, and we didn't understand. And in fact, we expected him to be grateful that he had this wonderful day with his friends, and it wasn't going that way. And so when we got home, he locked himself in the bathroom and refused to come out, and it was bedtime. And well, he was actually past bedtime because we had let him stay up, and he had had a great day. And so you know, in our frustration, we made the decision to go in and physically guide him to leave the bathroom. And in the struggle, he ended up biting me, and it was not pleasant. And the day after Christmas, I ended up having to go get a tetanus shot because he had broken the skin with the bite. And so I know that's not a fun story. It's definitely not what you would expect when you have a resource child come into your home and you're hoping that it'll go well, and then you end up getting a tetanus shot the day after Christmas. But the reason that I tell this is just because it's good for us to try and anticipate and be aware of things that we think of as happy, joyous events, and they can be, but at the same time, they can be traumatic for our kiddos. You know, who knows if he had negative associations, if he had holidays that didn't go well with his family, or even if they did, maybe he missed those events with his family, or maybe there was actual trauma that occurred on a special occasion that he remembers, or who really knows what happened. But it's good for us to be aware and try to think ahead and anticipate things like that before we get our own expectations up, and that causes us to possibly overreact in a situation that we need to still be the calm, mature adult to get through. Thanks.
So one of the important concepts that we like to talk about with regard to trauma triggers and caring for children involved with the system is the idea of slowing things down. Any individual or family can get caught up in the rush and in time schedules, and what can be very helpful is to slow things down. Give yourselves more time when trying to get to school or to an activity or get into the car, so that you are creating space to be responsive and more aware. All of us can get caught up in being kind of stressed in the moment of a crunch to get somewhere and not be as responsive as we would like. So really good information from Dot. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Quality Parenting Initiative, and this is a really important initiative that is actually not unique to our state or the nation. San Luis Obispo County was an early implementer, and it was developed out of the National Youth Law Center. And the concept behind this is that as a nation and as an institution, we realized that we really needed to do a better job interacting with and supporting and partnering with resource and relative parents to achieve the outcomes and results that we wanted. And what that requires is a relationship and transparency. So we as a county, we have a stakeholder group. It's called the Quality Parenting Initiative, and it's a group of supervisors, managers, social workers, and most importantly, resource and relative parents who come together and talk about what's working really well in our county in terms of our relationship and our cases and our services and supports. And we also talk about and listen as to what is not going well in areas that we as an institution and as a department need to work on. And so it's this collaboration between resource and relative parents and the department in really trying to strengthen relationship and partnership in serving our community. And we've done some really, really good work at the suggestion of our resource and relative parents. So you will be invited and are invited to participate in those. We are offering those via Zoom, which is actually turning out to work very well in many regards. Again, it can be difficult to find childcare and make arrangements and such. And so I encourage you, we'll provide more information and contact if and when you're able to even just sit in and learn a little bit more about it. One area that is not unique to our county or to our state is feedback that sometimes resource and relative parents don't receive calls back as quickly as they need to or they would like to. And out of a growing awareness of importance of having a more timely response, our county developed a foster support program. And this unit's sole purpose is to receive calls and requests for support from resource parents in the event that they're not able to reach their social worker. In many jobs, contacting somebody's supervisor can be seen as punitive, and often families are afraid to get them in trouble. However, earlier in the presentation, when I talked about our department structure and our philosophy of working together, our position is that our social workers are often out in the community doing assessments, doing home visits, attending court hearings, such that they may not be available to receive calls or return calls in a timely manner as we would like. So they should have their supervisor's phone number listed on their voicemail. And you can also call the foster support unit. The next slide is going to talk a little bit about those supports. I won't read it to you in its entirety, but I encourage you to get to know them and become familiar. Some small examples are things like if an individual or family takes placement of a small child and they need a crib and they need that quickly, we can help support that. Medi-Cal cards or academic information or things that we can, through the foster support unit, kind of move on pretty quickly to get those to you. We're also really fortunate in our county that we have the support of leadership and we can be creative, and that's our goal. We certainly, I'm not saying that we can meet every need, but there are times when there are unique needs for a family to support a child that we will work to see if we can meet that need. So if you do have questions, concerns, or needs, please reach out and we'll do our best to see what we can do. Dot is going to talk a little bit about being a resource parent, and here you go.
Hi, this is Dot, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what worked well for me as a foster parent. And it's such a broad range because I swear every day is a surprise. You just kind of never know what you're going to get, and a big part of it is just, you know, being willing to be flexible and roll with the punches. But that being said, I think that it's good to strive for consistency because our kids need predictability as much as possible. So I went through a number of schedules for the family when I was a resource parent, and some of them worked for some kids and some of them didn't work for others. And so it's good to have that, but also to be flexible and make adjustments at times when it's not working. And so maybe it'll work for a while and then it'll stop working because something happened, and you just never know. But you know, try for consistency until it's not working and then try something else. Sometimes it's just the littlest things that can really make a big difference, and you just never know what it's going to be, which is why it's so important to keep going to trainings and talking with other resource parents, and, you know, express your frustrations and let them know what's not working well, and maybe they've been through the same thing, and maybe they'll have just a little hint that makes things so much better that you probably already knew, or maybe you needed a reminder, or just to see things with a different perspective. When I was a resource parent, I kept a journal of things that I had learned in trainings and just things that came to mind or ways to look at things, and it was really helpful. And then another group I know has a deck of cards that they labeled the fronts of with different, you know, tips or tricks or just just something to try when you just don't know what to do, and you can open up this deck of cards, and it doesn't have to be cards, you can make your own out of index cards, but you can just open them up and flip through them when you're just out of ideas and you need something new to try. And I like that. You can go through and write on just even simple things that might work, like, take your teenager for a drive in the car and talk to them while you're driving, because it gives you a good distraction and not staring at each other. Or give yourselves a break. Phone a friend when you need to. Ask your child's team for help when you're frustrated. Let your child volunteer and feel useful to others outside of the immediate family. There are so many little tips that aren't, I can't share them all, but as you collect them over time, it can help to just group them and organize them and keep them to where you can reference them in times where you're struggling. And I think that is helpful. Thanks.
So one of the other benefits of the Foster Support Program and the Quality Parenting Initiative is the opportunity to connect with other resource parents and develop relationship and connection. And so Dot's example of using index cards is just one great example of kind of that shared experience and opportunity to support other families through their journey of parenting. So that completes our first session of pre-certification training. And in order to complete your training requirement, you will need to complete the second part of this series, which is available to you. In the interim, I want to make sure that you have information on who to contact and how to contact us if you have questions or concerns, in addition to your resource family social worker. So for general information and training information, please use the 1705 number. Our foster support number is listed there, and as well as my phone number. So please, if after you complete the segment or after session 2, please feel free to reach out and ask any questions that you might have so that we can support you. Thank you for your willingness and interest to support children and families.